Marine historical researcher, and for this week's Fact or Fiction, it's going to be a 4-part series. Starts out tonight about Admiral Byrd and Operation Highjump. Gunner, buddy, welcome to the show.
How you doing, Mac?
Doing really well, man. Doing really well. Hope you are too.
How's my audio there? Is it okay?
You sounding good. You coming through loud and clear, my friend.
Good. I had to retire my 30-year-old phone, and so I'm taking a risk on this one.
You're sounding good, man. So we got a 4-part series coming up. You put together this first part tonight, and I was scanning through it earlier. Some of the links and everything that you sent me. I'm really fascinated. I'm curious. First off, before you jump into your piece of it here, what got you interested in this to do this much research on it?
Well, I've been interested in it for quite a long time, and a person had once given me a book, and I'm a modeler, a wooden ship modeler, and someone had given me a book about Shackleton and his Arctic exploration, and this was way before Byrd. And so I sort of got started like that, but I'd known about Byrd since I was a kid, and I always considered him, one of the heroes of our country. And but I spend a lot of time on the internet. I watch a lot of historical documentaries, and I kept seeing a lot of questionable things, and it just sort of got under my skin. And no matter what I would tell people about my own research, whatever, they seemed to reject it, for whatever else was on the internet. And so I just decided to put this together and for you guys and see how it went.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, man. So this is part 1. This is the origin story. You're going to give us how this all started out. What was the kicker that kicked all this off? Because I'll be honest with you. The stuff I know about Admiral Byrd is the one particular thing, about what he saw when on his trip, and then a lot of the flat Earth people too glam onto this guy. So it's always been a topic of interest to me, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you got to say about it.
Yeah, and in my 25 years as a historical researcher, this has to be the biggest poorly created and supported hijacking of history I've ever seen. And it does have something for everyone. You got a secret diary, secret naval operation, Hollow Earth, secret Nazi bases, UFOs, and Russians. I mean, the Russians again,
Yeah.
In fact, there's so much out there on the internet presented by so many. It's almost impossible to determine where it started or originated. And people like me attempting to research it, it's like getting confronted with so many little trees that you're forced to just consider the entire forest instead. And only a handful of researchers that I've seen have managed to separate the facts from the fiction.
Yeah, I don't even know where we're going here, so I'm really curious to get your take on it, because there's so much BS going on that I don't even know what to make of it. It's just one of those things. It's fascinating. I mean, like you said, it's got all the pieces of conspiracy or mystery, that you get, especially when the internet kicked off, and got all this kind of genre really got a cohesive nature to a lot of this stuff. And this plays with everybody's interest.
Yeah. Well, let's start out with Admiral Byrd. Admiral Byrd was born in 1888 in Winchester, Virginia. He attended Virginia Military Institute and the United States Naval Academy. He graduated in 1912. He was the youngest cadet. He played football for Navy until he suffered a broken ankle. He was an aviator, polar explorer, master of logistics. He's best known for his 1926 flight to the North Pole, and he, like Lindbergh, was awarded the Medal of Honor for that. He made 2 expeditions to Antarctica before 1940. He flew over the South Pole Thanksgiving Day, 1929. He got promoted to Rear Admiral for that. And in 1934, he spent a winter alone at a remote weather station, and he almost died from carbon monoxide poisoning.
Oh, wow.
From that, because his stove malfunctioned. Yeah, and they had to rescue him.
At least he didn't. I thought you were going to say he brought it in and was cooking hot dogs on it or something like the Mexicans do. Just kidding.
And in World World War II, he surveyed remote Pacific islands for airfields and advised on logistics. And he actually retired in 1947, but he made two more Antarctic expeditions under the Navy command, one in 1947 and in 1955, and those were high jump and deep freeze. And he died in his sleep in 1957. And I grew up in Virginia, about 40 miles from Winchester. And Byrd was a big deal. Byrd was one of our biggest heroes in school. And I remember watching in like the early 80s, watching the 1961 CBS biography episode with Mike Wallace, which is still on the internet today. And,
yeah. Oh, well, that goes back a ways, 1961. I mean,
yeah, I know, I'm sure.
What
Yeah.
what did the what was the angle on that? Was it just about historical stuff, or was any of this other stuff brought up?
It was pretty much Mike Wallace. That whole series there on CBS was taking people out of history and doing a biography piece on them.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And so it was Mike Wallace just going through the life of and expeditions of Byrd and stuff like that in 1961. Of course, I didn't see that until the early 80s, so I'm showing my age a little, but that's all right.
Okay.
But, what keeps coming up on the internet is this thing that Byrd had a secret diary. And this is just one of those things that doesn't seem to go away, no matter how many times people address it and debunk it. It is so... it's wormed its way into just about everything, like I said. And as far as the diary goes, I mean, Byrd had previously published portions of a diary from his 1926 North Pole flight. In 1928, he wrote a book called Skyward, Man's Mastery of the Air. And that led to a dispute with some claiming that he fell short because he had an engine leak. And he had erased portions here and there in his diary, calculations about having a tailwind on the first leg out, fuel calculations, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But he still got awarded the Medal of Honor for it from Congress. But, in 1959, and this is where all this started with the secret diary that I found, a self-proclaimed scientist called Francis Amadeo Giannini published a weird book titled Worlds Beyond the Poles, The Physical Continuity of the Universe, in which he claimed Byrd had made a North Pole flight in 1947, right? And Giannini was a proponent of the flat Earth theory, and he was also the son of famous banker Amadeo P. Giannini. And there must have been something wrong with Francis because his father had refused to give him any money, even though he was a famous banker.
The whole flat Earth thing didn't rest well with him, I guess.
Well, yeah, it probably didn't go over well. So this was the first reference to a 1947 flight. And like I said, Giannini's family owned the Bank of Italy, which became the Bank of America. And it was thought that his claims were intended to create controversy, and that's exactly what happened. In 1961, he got challenged by several researchers, but Giannini could never provide any proof, and his stock answer was always, it's all in the New York Times, because the New York Times had put out a piece about him. So unfortunately, we're never going to know if this was simply a mistake he never corrected, Did he mean to put down 1927 and made the mistake of putting 47, or did he do it on purpose?
Oh, yeah. That's going to be...
We'll never know, right? So in the 70s, a group calling itself the Society for a Complete Earth, this is a hollow Earth, hollow Earth people, right?
Right.
Led by a Native American captain, Tawani Wakala Shush, published and sold a mimeographed pamphlet. You guys remember what mimeographed is, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That that was the stuff that, when the teacher brought you a test paper or a paper, and it was still hot off the press, and you could smell the alcohol on it.
And weird color of purple too, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's right. This is what this was, And he claimed it was a suppressed diary of Admiral Byrd's North Pole flight in 1947. And Schuch claimed that he was a former Marine captain and a pilot, and his goal was to fly a dirigible into an opening in the earth to contact the blue-eyed super race of Ariani, who spoke a language similar to German and used flying saucers to observe humanity. And the cover of the pamphlet featured the logo of the Nazi Fool Society in 1919.
Ah, okay.
Huh. And this got the attention of researcher and Hollow Earth theorist Dennis Crenshaw. I think he's still around. He's got a big site on the internet. He was creator of the Hollow Earth Insider Research Report, and he immediately challenged his claims. And Crenshaw was also an admirer of Byrd, and he accused Schuch of smearing Byrd by creating the diary to make money. And what the diary is, as he presented it, was a combination of flight log entries with a narrative written after the flight. It claims Byrd encountered UFOs that had a type of swastika insignia on them during the flight, and that they took control of his aircraft and took him through an opening in the earth with a tropical climate near a modern city, where he was lectured by the master of the Ariani, who was warning Byrd about the use of nuclear weapons, that we were going to destroy the earth and whatnot. And so Crenshaw immediately recognized it couldn't have been written by Byrd, because Byrd had a very distinct formal style of writing. And compared to the cartoonish so-called suppressed diary, something was really wrong with that, because he knew a lot about Byrd, and he had seen Byrd's diary entries from 1926, and probably some other writing too, I'm not sure.
Right.
But and the other thing was that Byrd couldn't have been two places at once, because Byrd was co-commanding Operation Highjump in the Antarctic from August 1946 to late February in 1947. So it was impossible for Byrd to be two places at once.
Interesting, yeah.
So what Crenshaw did is he enlisted the aid of a fellow researcher who discovered the smoking gun, which was that portions of the diary that this guy had created, saying it was Byrd's, matched the dialogue from a 1937 film called Lost Horizon, almost word for word. And Crenshaw proved this by comparing the script from the scene from the actual movie to the fake diary, and that would be clip one.
All right, we'll roll that coming up right now. Admiral Byrd, missing diary, fact or fiction?
You, my son, will live through the storm. You will preserve the fragrance of our history and add to it a touch of your own mind. Beyond that, my vision weakens. But I see at a great distance a new world stirring in the ruins, stirring clumsily, but in hopefulness, seeking its lost and legendary treasures. And they will all be here, my son, hidden behind the mountains.
All right, Gunner, that was the clip of the diary. Did you hear? Are you able to hear that? I'm not sure.
No, I'm not able to hear it. I've only got one headphone, so I'm not sure.
Okay. So we just finished that.
I could just barely hear it.
Okay, we'll get that. Try to crank over to you a little more sound. Sometimes that's in the system. We haven't really tested that part out yet, but yeah. So that's interesting. So we got that out of the way. That was the clip about the diary piece that we just played.
Right. So could you see where he's underlining the the dialogue in the diary
Yes.
as the script from the movie plays, right?
Right. Yeah.
You can see where, so it's obviously fraudulent, you know, and but despite the diary becoming or proving to be a plagiary, as it obviously is, and a fraud, people are still using it. You know, it continues to be used by proponents of the Hollow Earth theory, UFOs, and secret Nazi bases. And there's also the peculiar testimony of this guy calling himself U.S. Air Force Colonel Billy Fay Woodard, who claims that his father was Zora from Hollow Earth, and that he lived there. He was born in Hollow Earth, right? But they shrunk him down to the size of a toddler because and they were going to send him topside because the government had silenced Admiral Byrd, right?
Okay.
and he got adopted by the topsiders, us, right? So, and went into U.S. Air Force. Somehow got promoted from second lieutenant to colonel to be sent on a special assignment to Area 51.
Okay.
He claims to have read the original secret diary of Admiral Byrd, and that's clip 2, and it starts at 9:30 and goes for 53 seconds.
Okay. Hopefully you'll hear this one this time, Gunner.
My take on it was several reports that I read were mediocre. The ones that piqued my interest were ones about Admiral Byrd and things of that nature.
So can you tell us about some of the reports that you read on Admiral Byrd?
I read his original diary, the one that the true diary, not the one floating around the internet.
Was this original copy of the diary?
The original copy.
What did it look like?
What did it look like? It was in the form of a flight log.
So his diary was written into his flight log.
Yes,
As a
it
pilot,
was.
he would keep a log.
Yes, he would.
Let's go back a little bit.
Okay.
All right, Gunner. So it's hard to convey this gentleman to the listeners out there. So what's going on with this guy? What's the crystal on his head, or what the copper thing that he's wearing around his head?
He's wearing a crystal headband that they call this a Lemurian headband, and I guess it's fashioned out of copper. There's a silver centerpiece attached to a crystal that's supposed to sit over your third eye on your forehead, and it's supposed to enable him to think better, and also helps him to communicate telepathically with people. And if you want one of them, he's selling them for $150. I can give you a link.
That's okay. Was this guy legitimately was he really a colonel in the Air Force, a lieutenant?
I doubt it. I doubt it very much.
Yeah.
He's another one. He's like Randy Kramer.
Yeah. Okay.
That claims that he, you know, that he has this top secret type thing, and that he's trying to get his records but can't. He's another one that I can't seem to get enough data on to file a FOIA request for his records.
he's so high up that he just can't talk about it anymore. They've erased his records out of the.
He's one of those guys, right? That's Billy Ray or Billy Fay for you. You know?
Gotcha.
So this is what we got with him, but you know, this the connection with Byrd and to Nazis and UFOs. Seems to have occurred on March 5th, 1947, following Operation Highjump, when Byrd held a press conference from reporters in Chile on their way back from the Antarctic, and Byrd's actual statement was misquoted. And some say that was on purpose to suggest that Byrd had seen UFOs. And this is the actual statement from a U.S. reporter, Lee Van Etta. Quote, Admiral Richard E. Byrd warned today that the United States would adopt measures of protection against the possibility of invasion of the country by hostile planes coming from the polar regions. The admiral explained that he was not trying to scare anyone, but the cruel reality is that in case of a new war, the United States could be attacked by planes flying over one or both poles. The statement was made as part of a summary of his own polar experience. In an exclusive interview with international news services talking about the recently completed expedition, Byrd said that most important result of his observations and discoveries is the potential effect that they have in relations to the security of the United States. The fantastic speed with which the world is shrinking, recalled the admiral, is one of the most important lessons learned during his recent Arctic exploration. He said, I have to warn my compatriots that the time has ended when we're able to take refuge in our isolation and rely on the certainty that distances, oceans, and the poles were a guarantee of safety. The quote was later manipulated by a Chilean journalist and newspaper, saying that Byrd stated he didn't want to frighten anyone, but that it was a bitter reality that in case of a new war, the continental United States would be attacked by flying objects which could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. So this is the origin of this connection between Byrd, Operation Highjump, and UFOs. That's it. And adding to the disinformation of that was the fact that two Nazi U-boats had surrendered in Argentina 2 and 3 months after the war ended in 1945. The U-boats U-530 and U-977 surrendering there in Argentina fueled speculation that there were secret Nazi Antarctic bases and that Hitler had survived the war. And after surrendering to the Argentine authorities, the German U-boat commanders were extradited to the United States, where they responded to the charge of having torpedoed a Brazilian cruiser, and then they were sent to the UK, where they faced accusations that they had landed Nazi leaders in Argentina before surrendering. And both of those boats were seized by the United States Navy and sunk during naval gunnery exercises. And there's a very credentialed military historian, Mark Fenton, has a load of stuff on the internet, and he mentions the Argentina situation in this video, which is clip 3, historian Mark Fenton, starts at 4:05.
Here we go, clip 3. Can you hear those clips now, Gunnar? Just curious.
Yes, I can, thank you.
First visited Antarctica before surrendering in Argentina. Some speculative and exaggerated newspaper stories in the local Argentine press at the time suggested that Hitler himself had been offloaded in Antarctica. The person responsible for this fiction was a Hungarian exile living in Argentina called Ladislas Szabo. He published a book called Hitler is Alive in 1947, setting out his evidence. Despite no actual concrete evidence, and the commander of both German submarines denying such a voyage or the existence of such a secret base, Szabo's fiction has become accepted fact in some quarters. Another problem with the idea of U-boats visiting the Antarctic coast is that June, July and August are the midwinter months in the southern hemisphere. A submarine would have trouble approaching the Antarctic coast. Pack ice, 1 to 2 meters thick, surrounds the coastline during the winter. It has been shown to extend between 500 and over 1,600 kilometers out from the coast between May and July. Both submarines would have to have traveled huge distances under the ice, many hundreds of kilometers or even thousands of kilometers. This was not feasible because these submarines were not true submarines but rather submersibles. They ran on the surface using diesel engines, and when submerged they could use a snorkel to suck in fresh air to allow the diesels to continue running, which would be impossible if they were under the ice, or they could run on electric batteries which powered the motors, and these required recharging. The other thing was the crew needed fresh air, so every 2 days or so the submarine would have to have surfaced through the pack ice. And is this feasible? Could German U-boats of the size and type really punch through 1 to 2 meters of ice. Navigation would have been very difficult due to 24-hour darkness and heavy cloud cover. If they had reached the coast alive, the U-boat crews would have then encountered average temperatures of minus 26 degrees Celsius with a wind speed of around 15 kilometers an hour, producing conditions of about minus 40 degrees Celsius. The story has been continuously elaborated down the decades. One story is Hitler's cremated remains were transported to the secret Nazi base in Antarctica and interred, along with boxes full of Nazi treasure hidden in an ice cave. Expanding on Szabo's original fiction, writers have even suggested that a 1947 US Navy expedition to Antarctica called Operation Highjump secretly battled die-hard Nazis and lost, the Nazis possibly having extraterrestrial assistance. In reality, Highjump was a huge exercise to train ships' companies and aircrew in operating in such hostile conditions.
Oh, right. That's kind of a fascinating take on it there, Gunner, shooting it down.
Yeah, that's he does a good job at breaking that down. I know there was a lot of detail on the submarines there, but it has to be done because it's a fact that those submarines were not capable of doing what people say that they actually did. They wouldn't have been able to penetrate the ice shelf around there. I was surprised to find, in addition to this, that a man that was Ernst Zundel, very famous for his questioning details of the Holocaust, also contributed to the conspiracy. And I'm wondering how many more people recently may be using Zundel as a source of inspiration or as a source at all, but not admitting it because of Zundel being accused of being a Holocaust denier. But under the pseudonyms Christoph Friedrich and Martin Friedrich, Zundel wrote several publications promoting the idea that UFOs were craft developed by German scientists and who had fled to New Swabia, Antarctica, and the titles were Secret Nazi Polar Expeditions in 1978 and Hitler in the South Pole in 1979. And he was promoting the idea of Nazi bases in Antarctica and Nazi UFOs and secret polar bases and hollow Earth theories. And along with another guy, Willibald Mattern, a German immigrant living in Santiago, Chile, Zundel also wrote UFOs, Nazi secret weapon, and that was translated into English from the German. It's not clear whether Zundel actually really believed this, what he was writing about, or whether, was he just putting out fiction. But a quote from Zundel I found says that I realized that North Americans were not interested in being educated. They wanted to be entertained, and the book was just for fun, with a picture of the Fuhrer on the cover and flying saucers coming out of Antarctica. It was a chance to get on radio and TV talk shows. That really disappointed me about Zundel,
Yeah, that's I think I've seen that book somewhere, the cover that you have. But what in your opinion here, as we close out and thinking back about all this, what do you think Operation Highjump was about? It not just an expedition to the polar regions, or was it something? Could there have been something else there? Could the Germans have been there? Because we know that the Germans were traveling; they went all over the world. I mean, there could have been German equipment down there, right? I mean,
well, there's no doubt that the Germans were active in the area. They sent a small expedition in 1938 and 39 to try to set up a base, and they did do some aerial mapping and things like that. But as I'm going to show you in the next 3 parts of this series, especially in part 2 and 3, I'm going to go into detail about what Operation Highjump really was, and that it had absolutely nothing to do with secret Nazi bases or our personnel being attacked by UFOs and losing and have to skedaddle out of there. It's absolutely false.
Okay. Sounds awesome, Gunner. This has got me fascinated. I'm looking very forward to the next 3 segments, and I really appreciate your work, buddy.
No problem.
Have a good night, Gunner.
You too.
God bless you, sir.
Right.
All right, man.
Right.
That is something else, Beast. You know,
Yeah, we were talking about it on the chat.
a lot of that I didn't know, but and I should have, before I let Gunner go, I should have asked him some of this. But you know, the one thing I find fascinating about this whole story is that you look at the plane, the Gunner. I mean, I can't show this over the radio here, but I mean, this guy is flying this bi-wing plane, which it's got a modern fuselage, but he flies this thing to Antarctica. I mean, what an adventure you must have been. I mean, because there was no like help coming. I mean, you go down, you're dead, man. I mean, there is no.
Well, the guy was a graduate of VMI and the U.S. Naval Academy, obviously. I mean, not only is he smart, he's probably adventurous.
I mean, but any of these guys, heading down to the South Pole or any of the poles at that time, and getting out and trekking around. I mean, there was no satellite phone. There was no GPS. There was no nothing. I mean, this were times when men were real men. The world was your oyster, so to speak. I mean, there was a lot more stuff going on where, there seems to me like things were a lot different then.
I have to admit this. I bet that I heard of Admiral Byrd when I was a kid, because I do recall those, sorry, Anonymous. Sorry about the ginger. I told him not to. But I recall those Mike Wallace, the black and white films. I remember sitting in social studies, and my teacher, he was like really old, and he would make us watch those movies. And those are actually kind of cool now as an adult. I'm like, you know what? I think I want to go back and watch those. But I don't really remember talking about this guy.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I haven't done this. I haven't delved this far into it. I kind of always got stuck at the conspiratorial stuff and the hollow earth thing. I always thought was interesting. And the flat earth, the way this played into the flat earth. There is a quote, and I'm sure that we'll get into this at some point during Gunner's research, that he basically recorded or an interview or a speech or something. I don't remember, but a lot of people use it. I saw a guy on InfoWars a couple of weeks ago that they did a rebuttal to the flat earth or something. It was a pretty long video that they did. And he used he used a little piece of video out of that in his little presentation. And it wasn't to shoot down the flat. It was showing some of the evidence of what people say about the flat earth, why it is what it is. I don't know. I think that's interesting. Do I believe in? I don't know. I could see it all being a lie. I really could. It's just a fascinating thing to me.
Well, one of the things I'm curious to hear about in the second part is how did the Nazis figure into all of this?
Well,
I understand, Hitler, like we were talking about on the chat. I mean, he was all about some exploration and engineering and,
Well, I think we just explored a lot of that, the UFOs I think what the point of what Gunner was saying here is that there is a lot of these pieces that can be easily proven to be false, right? And a lot of the pieces that had other pieces and then other things come along and use pieces of those things. And so they start contriving this. And then you get a guy with a copper band and a crystal on his head.
Yeah. Well, it's just to cover up his third eye. You can buy one.
Oh,
and we
my
nailed
God.
down that he does live in Nye County, Nevada.
Art Bell's
yeah.
old part of the country there. Interesting. All right, let's take a break right here. I need to get a beer, and we'll be back in mere moments. Thanks again, Gunner, for that work. That was great stuff.